This is a project that is been done for a few years now, and I've got a lot of pictures of it. We'll see if there's any interest in anybody wanting me to dig them up and show. Nobody ever really asked much beyond just, hey, how did you make that? But I am very proud of this. This deck was given to me by my wife very early on when we were dating. We were, I don't know how many years together then. And when she gave it to me, it had no trucks on it. So I took, without having any money, trucks off a board that I had since I was, I don't know, 12. This Jeff Phillips, which is awesome and iconic in its own right. And I didn't really ride it anymore. It was when popsicle sticks, and I'd moved, I'd pulled them off. I put the trucks on here. I let my friend hang this on the wall. By then I had pulled off my original rails and kick guards and whatnot. It became a wall hanger. Move on, years, married, whatnot. I wanted to get back into skating, regular skateboards again. I'd made several other lower speed boards, carvers that are customs that I made, and I wanted this one back together. So in order to do that, I had to pull the trucks off of this. And this sat on a shelf for years, not being used. Eventually, when I want this back together, I got guards to be able to skate it and have it be more like I rode it when I was younger to keep the tail from getting beat up. But having done that, I knew I wanted to be able to, when I finally decided I wanted to get trucks for this one on its own and have them both together, that I wanted to get protection for it. The nose was already beat up, the tail was already beat up from me riding it and whatnot. And at this point, to me, it's an heirloom. I wanted to look for stuff. Nothing's out there. It doesn't exist. At least not for, boards like this. You can find guards for some very standard size or stuff for electric, which is like automotive trim stuff. I really wasn't happy with it. So I knew I was going to have to, like many things I do, make it totally custom. So with that in end, I stripped all of the original gripping material off of it and got it down to its bare, sanded it and whatnot. And I took this flower, before these were on here, obviously, I took a picture of it and blew it up so that I could use it for other imagery. I'll pause the video real quick, get some things out of the way. So I started collecting plastic, recyclable plastic. Seen some people do it. And I started collecting red Folgers cans, black lids, clear jugs, white, and I chipped it up and I put it in a bread tin in a pan with parchment, and I melted it down. The graphic's not on the original to the board, that's what I did. And then before I laid them down, I had sheets of plastic in various colors that I laid flat, cut out to that pattern of that flower in the bottom of the pan, put all this stuff on the top of it, and melted a block. This was covered in plastic and inset into it. The block had 2 sets of flowers, and I cut it in half. I wasn't sure what was going to work where. That's why this one's so far in, and in order to get far enough out and around this very pointed tail, it ended up further in than I really wanted to. But when I cut the trim pieces off, then I used those to make the stacks. This is how thick the material was when I made it. These pieces have been fused on with a heat gun to build up this height to give me that edge. The extra materials out of these blocks also led to my custom riser pads, because with these tricked out gull wings on there, which I've even modified further because they're meant for a different style of board to be much stiffer. This board has a very high ride height. It is very carvy, even though it's very stiff to avoid wheel bite, but it rides like a surfboard, or at least what I imagine to be, versus the other boards I have. And that is my other riser pad from that. And then I carved, after I cut these pieces out, made these risers. These were all machined more or less on a drill press with a vise, an adjustable vise. I carved these out with a set of wood carving tools. Used a heat gun to polish all that up, and again stack these decks. Now because I envisioned that this would be a tail that would wear, and when you kick it up and whatnot, I knew this would wear down. I took and sourced some titanium rod on Amazon. So there are titanium rods in a fan shape here, inset into the plastic. They each go in about 1.5 inches thereabouts, so that when this wears down, eventually it will hit that very well embedded titanium rod, which will not wear as fast, and it'll slow this down. Plus, that'll be pretty cool, sparky. However, when I did that, that was, I think, before I knew I was going to do these Coolios once I found them. But when you do this, it moves the axle back further. So the wheelbase on this board is much longer than it was originally, and it doesn't pop up on the tail as easily when riding, more or less just generally when I come to a stop. I wanted edge guard, so nothing exists. This represents many hours of practice and development. This is PEX pipe from a hardware store that has been custom heat shaped to fit the board. Now, it is one piece. There's a notch to prevent the pooking in the front. And at this point, I had already done several projects with LEDs, and I'm like, well, if I've got this material here, and I originally was doing red to match, but I was like, aha, I want to light it. I tried some other types of lighting that was not as bright, and when I decided I wanted to go to LED, and then I found the ones I found, I switched to white so that I could do an RGB LED setup in this. It goes around the trim. Now, it is 2 strips, so this is a power hungry thing. You found them on Amazon. It's a kit, USB. What I did is I spliced the 2 ends onto one controller, and it runs it quite well. And so the strips come back to the point, and then there is a wire that comes up under here. You can see the connection there, and the controller is hidden under the riser pad, plus rubber risers. And then this whole battery setup was centered around finding a battery that was capable of running the lights. They have sort of a startup value that if the battery's not got enough to trip over, it won't be there, the remote won't respond, and the light won't start up. So this is a quick charge battery. It's a pretty decent one, and I happened to find it in a cylinder shape, which then led to this arrangement here, where the tube is another sourced online thing. It's a titanium tube. I got it from China. Took a month to come in. I then split it down its side, and you can see the power lights in there because the lights are plugged in, so that I could make this clamping effect. And these are clamps for lights that would go on like a ATV or something. I've used things like that before on my motorcycle. The wire comes out the front of the riser pad up under, sorry, all the moving around, up under there. It pops out, it tucks into here and coils around, because at the time I was not comfortable with trying to cut this USB wire shorter, and it hasn't bothered me enough to mess with it since then. It's poking out because I haven't tucked it in well, but normally it stays hidden in there and doesn't stick out. And I ride that so that if I ever hit anything, the battery's not going to blow up on me and burn my board to hell. And even if it did go off, I expect that any kind of flaring would occur out the sides and hopefully protect the board. The graphic is something I picked out on a sticker website, made some mods too, talked to them really well, got it sized, had it done in reverse. This is a clear automotive cherry coat. I laid the whole can, it's 2K. And then I used toothpicks and whatnot to come in here and draw lines, trying to get rid of this light glare, through the graphic to produce this extra dimension that wasn't there originally. That said, I sanded it all flat to get rid of the raising that occurred from that technique, and then clear coated it and sand clear coated until it's you basically can't feel it, even though it had a lot of texture in this area. You kind of can, but this is a 2K automotive paint that is top and bottom. It is also, and this is some of my favorite parts here, what sets the grip. This is not grip tape. This is 2K paint with a clear reflective glass bead that's used in making signs, and then a product that's specifically designed, rather not designed, but marketed in its use for skateboards, and that is a phosphorescent glow-in-the-dark grip tape material. And there. So it looks to the eye like the flowers and stuff have extra detail to them, but really they don't. That's just the fact that the glowing grit that's over the darker areas are absorbed, you know, they're losing some of their light to the dark side, so to speak. And the other ones just appear to be brighter because they're in front of a white background. And then you can see where these are, and that's extra work that I had to do. I'm about to step up and turn the light back on after I do the next thing. Come back to talking about these insets and the work that it took to attach all this on here, but this is the fun part for me. Okay, took me a second. Haven't ridden the board in a while, and the controller has sort of a capacitor value that it has to have charged before it will have enough juice to respond to the remote control and kick on. And sometimes when the setup's new, it requires plugging it into an actual wall charger to set it up so that the remote will trigger it, and then after that the battery will work. It's just one of the limitations of this particular style of LED setup, which I have used several times now, because as you can tell, how cool is that? I mean, it'll do a lot of different patterns and colors and whatnot, but this one is one of my favorites because it hits all the colors and it makes the bike, or not the bike, I put these on a lot of things, like I said, it makes the skateboard look like it's moving faster. Now, because the power is from the back, the lights default to motion the other direction, meaning the one direction, if you go through the list, they all go the other way, and the other direction, if you go through the options, they go this direction, and you actually find your way around to this. So it means it's at the complete middle of all of the selections is the one I like. That's, you know, whatever. But the mirror, because, you know, car shows and whatnot, and how cool to be able to see the extra, but it lights the ground very nicely around you, and it is very visible when you're riding. Granted, I'm not very the lighting's not very tall on it. If I'm crossing an intersection, I pick it up and carry it. I am a very well lit object at night, though I wish I could work out like headlights, because it doesn't really light the ground ahead of me, so I generally just skate in pretty clean areas, so far as not wanting to worry about cracks and things. But with those shark wheels, it will tear up some cracks pretty well, with, you know, not hitting any rocks or anything and not worrying about it. And even with all this, you can still see the phosphorescent glow of that dust. So even with the lights on, it is definitely still bright enough to see the effect during the day. Go ahead and turn it off. And this is the remote that came with the kit. It has a little flashing light on it, like it's a, you know, infrared, but it's actually a RF controller. And I've done a number of these kits now, so I have a number of these controllers because each one comes with a controller. And as I said, this is two separate kits, two light strips, so that we can achieve this from the point back effect. Otherwise, it would have just gone in circles. And then I've got one that I did for underneath my daughter's bunk bed. I'd like to put one of these on my wagon from my other videos back there, on there. But these little bits. So because of all this 2K and the grit, there is a pattern here dremeled out to let this set down in. All these pieces are set stainless, so these holes are original. These are not. These are done with the hardware for my nose piece. That is also stainless. These are the stainless, the same kind of things that you would use, see from a hardware store that have the claws. Only I put them on a bolt and put them on my drill press with a file, and I hand filed off all of the teeth down to this nice little round inset piece. I found some vintage equipment that was very similar to this, but they were never stainless, and I didn't want this to rust on top. This material, because it's 2K, is very easy to clean. This PEX, because it's not UV resistant, has a coating of clear UV resistant paint on it that's like a archival style, just to try and prevent it from getting damaged faster. But I made so many of these, I can make them again. I have all the forms. I had to cut forms the shape of the nose on both sides. This was filled with sand, compressed, heated with a gun, bent, shaped, cooled, and then I have a custom cutting bit that cuts 2 strips at one time. It's a Dremel abrasive wheel that cuts the gap that then snaps around the skateboard, and the lights themselves are attached to the skateboard, and the trim goes over the top of it. I really enjoy riding this. It is very tall, so it is a bit of a workout, but that's part of the thing for me. I roller skate a lot, and I wanted something that made this as important long-term to anybody who saw this as it was to me for the board, and put this love that I had into it and make it an heirloom piece. I hope my kids appreciate it. You know, right now neither one of them skates. Maybe my daughter might, but even if it just hangs on a wall, that, you know, Dad made that, Grandpa, whatever, I adore it. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of work. It took me years. This represents multiple years of working on this, because I'd come to a stalling point. All of the new pieces were funded from gift cards from my parents for Christmas. Thank you, thank you. But I was originally using a different lighting system, and I was having a real hard time getting this bent, and I knew I wanted to protect the edge. So this sat untouched for a year before I finally figured out the packing the sand technique to get this to bend and not pinch. And then getting the graphics. This graphic came in right at the very beginning of the pandemic. It was like one of the last things that came out of that business before things started locking down, and it sat untouched for a very long time, a year before I went down and got a custom mixed can of paint from a local automotive place that they literally put the dye in the can. A shaker can, 2Ks, have a charger hardener on the bottom that you plunge into the can, and then after 24 hours that can will be a solid block if you don't use it. But if you have any questions, anybody interested in seeing pictures or any video, I did take video of all this stuff, not because I ever intended to share it with anybody. Nobody's ever really asked, but because I personally just like documenting my work. I someday I hope somebody will ask me how or why and whatnot. And I'm just hoping sooner than later.